For this roundtable, I will ask the two filmmakers, MT and HITOMI KAMANAKA, to respond to some of the questions that you submitted. MT and Kamanaka-san. And then I will ask the rest of panelists first to respond to, again, questions that you posed. And then probably open for the floor to ask more questions. Or maybe panelists may have questions each other. So we'll go with that. So first, MT, would you mind starting?
Okay, I don't think I'm going to be able to get to all of these, but I'll get to a few of them to start.
Let me just interrupt. If those of you can't hear at any point, please raise your hands so that the speaker will be reminded to speak into the microphone, okay?
Can you hear me now? Okay. Okay, what are veterans' reactions to the film? Did they empathize with your mom? It's been a mixed bag. It depends on which group of veterans I've shown the film to. Of course, Veterans for Peace is sort of like preaching to the choir. I got a very, very warm welcome and response to that. I showed it at the National Convention in Portland, Maine last August as a sneak preview, and it showed at 10 o'clock at night, the night before the conference started, and I thought nobody would come, but 60 people showed up, and we stayed up till 1:30 in the morning talking about it, and it was a very beautiful, positive experience where a lot of veterans talked about some of the things that they had done during their service that was troubling to them. I mean, we've all done things in our lives that we've regretted, and it was healing, and it was a really wonderful experience. I submitted it to the GI Film Festival where I was rejected. I've had other veterans say to me, you know, dropping the bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki ended the war and saved millions of American lives. There's a lot of that sentiment out there in an older generation of veterans. So it's been a mixed bag of response from veterans. Another question, I don't know if I have the courage to participate in a demonstration and get arrested. What can I do to help increase people's awareness about nuclear testing and the nuclear bomb? June 25th of this year is a global international day of action against nuclear weapons, and you can go to the nuclearabolition.org website. There's 10 suggestions of what you can do that day, from tweeting to participating in a flash mob to screening a film to writing to your senators and congresspeople. There's all kinds of stuff people can do personally, and what started for me was just sitting down at the kitchen table and having a conversation with my mom. And I think a lot of times we live like ostriches with our heads in the sand. We don't want to talk about things, but you know, it's just a matter of sitting down and having the conversation and start there and make it personal, because it is personal to all of us. Should I do another one, or? Yeah. Okay, your mother stated she would have declined participation. Would she have gone further and exposed publicly the dangers of the project and faced punishment for revealing secrets? Is declining participation enough to accept moral responsibility? I think at that time and age, my mother would not have gone further and exposed publicly at the time. I mean, it was an era of secrecy. It was the Cold War. I don't think she really felt like she had an avenue. I'm very proud of her today, that she's a whistleblower today, though. But I think at the time, I don't think she could. When you look at what Daniel Ellsberg did with the Pentagon Papers in the early 70s, that really motivated huge protests against the Vietnam War and really helped people learn what was going on and telling the truth of what was happening, and helped end that war. And I think today, in the age of WikiLeaks, and I'm really proud of my mom that she finally came clean about her experience and what she knew. Whether declining participation is enough to accept moral responsibility, that's a really big question. And, you know, moral responsibility means different things to different people. You look at Tibbets, who dropped the bomb on Hiroshima, and he would say it was his moral responsibility to do that. And, you know, I would have a different kind of moral responsibility. So he didn't decline participation, he participated and accepted that moral responsibility in his own mind. But the question of moral responsibility, I think, is a personal one, and it's something we each have to look at in our own hearts and minds. Somebody else want to go? Okay, your film highlights the particular context of the 1950s U.S. atomic popular culture. Example, Miss Atomic Bomb, 1957. Is the direct personal experience of that 50s culture an important road to conscience? Is it a problem that younger generations lack that context? Are we in a worse culture of secrecy and silence today? I can tell you that when I went to get the image of Miss Atomic Bomb, I went to the Las Vegas News Bureau to ask permission to use it, and when I walked in, there was a kid behind the counter, and I said, "Do you have any moving images besides this picture?" And he said, "Oh yeah, come on back, I'll show you what we have." And he sat me down at a monitor, and I saw the atomic hairdo that you saw in the film, and I saw some of the marquees of Welcome Atomic Soldiers to Las Vegas, and I said, "Oh my God, I have to have this." Well, when I requested the rights to use the footage in Miss Atomic Bomb, I was declined. And I went back, I think it was twice before I got support from the University of Nevada, Las Vegas, and the Atomic Testing Museum folks, and then they finally granted me the license to use it, and they gave it to me for free, but it was quite a struggle to get that. So I think that context of what was going on in the 50s was really important to set the climate of the times. And today it seems really absurd, and when young people see Atomic Bomb today, and they're just blown away by those images and the civil defense spots and how you could survive an atomic attack, and the woman flying through the air, just duck behind the furniture, you'll be fine, you know. It puts it in context for them to really do some critical thinking about how it was sold to us and how to translate that history today. And are we in a worse culture of secrecy and silence today? I think there's a lot we don't know, and I think the media could be more responsible in how they are telling us the information that they have. When I listen to the reports coming out of Japan and they say, you know, well, the nuclear weather forecast today is da-da-da, and I'm just sit there and I think, oh my God, is this going to be a normal daily household term now? We're just going to get desensitized to the fact of what that really means. It's going to be like the smog report. Or when they say there's no immediate danger, it's like, yeah, no kidding, but what about 10, 20 years from now? I mean, there's a responsibility there in the media that's not happening, and there's a responsibility from the Japanese government and the American government about what's going on and the facts that are coming to us. I don't trust a lot of the information that we're getting, and it's hard to get the real true story. So I think we have some issues about silence and secrecy today too.
Thank you so much. So, Kamanaka-san.
Okay, I got one question. It says, ashes to honey makes me reflect. Is our society divided irrevocably into two mutual irreconcilable. I cannot pronounce. Yeah, people of the land, like those in Hiroshima, who are willing to work and make sacrifices to fund alternative and protect nature. This side. And the other side, people of the city who want there to be big centralized solutions that someone else devises and the market validates. So I think agree. Yeah, so after this disaster, it became really, really visible. The two kinds of people, the line between these kind of people are, before it was ambiguous, not visible. But now it's so clear, and we feel like we divided far away from this side and the other side. And but you know, the other side, like a Hiroshima side people, feeling like maybe we shouldn't trust government saying, or a Japanese government is not trustable. Then what to do? We need to do by ourselves. And then Hiroshima inviting children from Fukushima prefecture, where really contaminated area. So already several people decided to move to Hiroshima, and their average age is getting down and down. And already several kids entered school. I think it's a small change. And also, young artists who work with me started a new government, like a second cabinet or second opinion, and then we have our own policy. And so he asked me to be head of minister of labor and health, and then I talk about different policy from present Japanese government. So because Japanese government is saying that children can stay in Fukushima prefecture receiving 20 millisievert per hour and per year, and it's a really, really high ratio, and we cannot accept it. Then we need to do other things, different things, to save our children and children in Fukushima. So I think one good thing is Japanese people started not just relying on or asking government do immediately what we need to do. This is big change after this disaster, but it never happened before. It's rapidly and widely this kind of activities is starting by citizens. Oh, another answers. Assistant Hani mentioned, average age of residents is very high, 70s. Demographic trend is down. Why do I feel current population is the most important measure? Don't we need to think long term and recognize that even over time population waxes and wanes, and first responsibility is to protect the land and environment and what is biodiversity? Biome. What is biome?
The environment.
Yeah, it is. But you know, I think almost average people who don't facing to the reality of having a nuclear power plant or plan or a pressure from a big electric company feel like this. But once a problem comes into your real life, it's really difficult to face that power of economy, power of money, and power of authorization. And then this power combined also with mass media. It's a huge four tags of big powers you need to confront to. And that's what Hiroshima people has been doing. And also isolated, not understood by people surround you. So this kind of hard work. So I think many people think like you, but the reality is a bit different. That's why we need to have another kind of subsidies concretely. That's what I did by my film to convince people we can have another choice, and it's possible. And also economically, it's also maybe better than having a nuclear power plant. Something like this.
Okay. Thank you so much. So I will ask Joe go first.
Okay.
So.
Hello. So I have a couple. Okay. How's this? A little better? So the first question I have is, Atomic Mom mentioned press orders by the Allies in 1945. What is known about subsequent or current press orders in effect now or recently? So maybe I could answer that by talking in a general way about secrecy and nuclearism. Right from the beginning of the Manhattan Project, of course, there were certain key scientific terms that started to disappear from academic journals, which is something that we're seeing again today at the level of a range of technologies, mostly around things like biosecurity. So efforts from the state, from international bodies, asking scientists to self-censor in terms of what they write about and what they publish about. That's one area. The story and the way in which the bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki were released in the United States were highly choreographed. There was, of course, a singular New York Times reporter that had access to the Trinity site and wrote a best-selling book about it that put it in heroic terms. We get a lot of our kind of mythic narratives about the power of the bomb from those very early narratives, which were highly crafted to present a very powerful and a very powerfully American notion about the bomb. And then we have a whole new system of secrecy that is in place during World War II, but that becomes solidified and expanded during the immediate post-war years and into the Cold War. 1947 is a crucial year because we have the National Security Acts passed in the United States, which creates, you know, what has become 16 intelligence agencies, mostly devoted to preventing Pearl Harbor-like attack from happening again. That was one of the initial charters. But the crucial thing for a democracy is that they were all designed to be secret. The whole point would be that they'd never have a kind of public presence in American life. So this is a very strange move for a democracy. And I think the bomb is very crucial in selling the idea that, and maybe even setting up a new kind of social contract whereby state secrets are essential for the preservation of the lives of citizens. And we now live in a world where this is a completely overdetermined structure, and we could spend a lot of time talking about the way in which secrecy works today. But I think this question that came up earlier about whether, generationally speaking, the 1950s are worse in many ways than today, I think that's really an open question and one very much worth asking. We can see a whole series of structures in the 1950s that precisely because they're slightly foreign and they look old and all these things, we can get a certain purchase on them and dismiss them internally as something that we're not connected to. But if we ask about how nuclear threat, secrecy, and the terms of our public discourse about danger is how that's structured today, I think we don't look so good, actually. A second question I got was to discuss the effects of nuclear production and testing on native peoples, past and present. We could think about that as a general kind of environmental justice question, and the bomb is maybe the ultimate environmental justice object. And the problem is that, of course, while everybody planetarily is affected in some way by nuclear production, in terms of global wind patterns and things like that, these effects are also distributed differentially based on particular kinds of population, proximity to, say, nuclear tests, nuclear wastes, nuclear power plants, and so on. So you can do a kind of new global economy through nuclear effects, and who gets the brunt of the problem, even if it's shared in a kind of planetary way. And I would say that many people have talked about the first decades of the build-out of the global nuclear complex as the era of a kind of nuclear colonialism, where the first sets of major projects tend to predominantly be on ethnic minority lands around the world. There are some pretty interesting maps that are available on this if you want to look at where nuclear tests happen and you know, who owns that land or claims the land that those tests are conducted on. We could also add nuclear waste in, and so on. So it's a really big issue, and it's another way in which the social contract around nuclear technologies becomes visible. Who's near the waste, who bears the brunt of it in their bodies is a very real issue. If I could, I was hoping to ask one question, maybe to Bob, if he would care to consider it. Because I've been involved in a whole series of conversations over the last couple of years about the so-called nuclear renaissance, right? And this idea that we were entering into a period precisely because of climate change issues where nuclear power was a crucial part of the solution. We've now, after Fukushima, had Germany say perhaps no nuclear power, Japan's reconsidering nuclear power. What was initially, I think, a pretty elaborate plan in the US for nuclear power plants maybe is reduced, maybe now just to a couple. I don't know exactly where it stands right now. So I kind of was curious about, you know, how you might think about the nuclear renaissance idea in general, but also I really heard what you said about the nuclear power plants being 40-year-old technology, right? And so there's this question of, you know, is the problem with nuclear power that we're dealing with old technology and not the right technology? Or, you know, are there other kinds of nuclear power designs that solve some of these basic intractable issues of the nuclear universe that we, you know, have built right now? I don't know if that's interesting to consider, but I'm curious about it.
Okay. So let's see. Let's start with the international picture. Okay. So I think there's very little question that even after Fukushima, I think that the major players that were there all along have not changed their mind. So who are they? They're China, they're India, they're South Korea, they're France. It will be interesting to see what Japan will do. I mean, I think many of us are just watching. I think the comment that was made earlier about the power of money speaks volumes about what is likely to happen, in my opinion, in Japan, because 3 of the major industrial combinations in Japan, Toshiba, Mitsubishi, and Hitachi, all are in this business. Okay. So if you were ask me what I would guess, and it's only a guess, is it's going to keep going. There will be modifications. There will be some papering over. It will, you know, but I think it will happen again. I mean, I'm sorry to say this, but I think that's what will happen. In the United States, I think there was never a nuclear renaissance, and my feeling is that it's very unlikely to happen. And the reason is, again, money. It has to do with the fact that here in the United States, well, don't clap because the reason is not so great, okay? The reason, I think, has to do with the fact that in the final analysis, American companies will not do things that are basically not in their economic interest, period. And so, for example, Exxon is in fact the largest nuclear utility in the United States. If you were to ask Exxon today, are they likely to build a nuclear plant in the foreseeable future, the answer is absolutely no. The reason is it doesn't make sense for them. At this point, especially in the context of what's happening with natural gas, and to the extent to which, for example, natural gas is extracted from tight sands formation or other shale gas, to which the environmental consequences are not drawn, that is, they are basically exempt from EPA regulation, it is remarkably inexpensive to extract it, and no nuclear technology will ever beat them economically, especially since we failed to exercise a cap and trade or carbon tax. So in the United States, it's just not going to happen. If you ask about technologies, that's an interesting question. So the plants that we were talking about, the ones that failed, are some of the oldest designs that are around. In the case of Chernobyl, it was, there was a design that no American company ever thought of building, namely a design that had absolutely no containment building. It was staggering that the Russians considered it and did it, okay? But that's what they did. In the case of the boiling water reactors that we're talking about, the Japanese ones, the ones that Dave mentioned exist here, these designs date back, actually the original designs date back to the early 60s. The plants themselves, GE built them in the sort of just around 1970, 71. They were picked up actually by Hitachi. Hitachi built some of the plants. The Hitachi and GE have a long-standing collaboration. And it is the case that the justification for building them back in the 70s, the reason they were built, is a justification that no longer exists today. And it has to do with the fact that at the time, the burn-up rate of nuclear fuel, of the boiling water reactors, was simply higher than the pressurized water reactors. And why that mattered was because during the 60s and 70s, there was a great concern that there, in fact, was not sufficient uranium, in fact, to power the industry in a sustainable way. So the industry at that point was very, very aware of how effectively, how efficiently you'd use the nuclear fuel, and they were very much interested in reactor generations that had higher burn-up rate. It's also the reason why during the 60s, early 70s, there was so much pressure to look after technologies that basically we no longer pursue in the United States, namely breeders or burners, however you want to call them. Now, the pointed question you ask is, are there technologies which are safer? The answer is absolutely yes. In fact, those technologies have been known about since Fermi. Fermi knew about them. So why haven't they been built? Well, it's again about money. It's more expensive. There are designs. So I'm, for example, I just wrote an article actually for KENNETTE's journal that talks about these kinds of designs. They incorporate, first of all, they respond to a very important aspect of nuclear, which is precisely because the risks are so high. You would be very reticent to rely too much on active intervention in case of an accident. I mean, that was the fundamental failure in Fukushima, is that they relied on a cascade, what is called defense in depth, where in fact they had a singular failure of everything that was in the chain. And the question is, does it have to be that way? No. It's possible to design reactors, they have been designed, that are passively safe. That doesn't answer the question about the front end and the back end. What do you do in the front in terms of enrichment? What do you do in the back end with the stuff that comes out? But in between, it is possible to design reactors, have been designed. They're just expensive. And so that's what it is.
Could I add a nuanced response to this? Yeah. On the issue of designs, though, let's see, where should we start? Maybe we'll start with the nuclear renaissance part, which was largely a public relations thing in the United States, which went nowhere but cost a lot of money. While it's true that in a market world, the renaissance is dead in the water before it goes anywhere, what you do see happening in the United States is the places where they are building reactors, which are Georgia and Florida, are doing so by changing the laws requiring ratepayers to pay for them in advance, whether they're finished or not. And when you look at the other countries that Bob just mentioned, he mentioned China, India, and France? South Korea. What you have there are centralized planning governments. You don't have a marketplace as we would prefer it, or anything that would resemble market forces dealing with the issues of either waste, expense, construction. So when you have ratepayer imposed liability of 100%, well, for sure, a sociopathic corporation whose self-interest is paramount is going to jump at that. And that's exactly what they did in Georgia. That's exactly what they did in Florida. Now that shifts to the design issue, because I'm glad this is the University of Chicago, because you will get this distinction. Reactor designs are of two types. There is nuclear power reactor designs, the platonic form, and nuclear reactor designs, the real world. And even amongst the new designs, there there's evidence and has come up in regulatory processes already that some of the newer designs have flaws that have to be worked out. And you would expect that from a new technology. But just the other day, the one design in this country that the Nuclear Regulatory Commission has even looked at as an advanced design with passive features has been halted again because they're not satisfied that Westinghouse Corporation has addressed what they perceived as a design deficiency. Canada canceled an order for the French EBR reactors for the same reason. So in the real world of reactors, understand this is a complex system. It's an incredibly complicated machine, even when you make it passive, and it will have its own unique design or inherently dangerous components that need to be looked at intrinsically and not just glossed over in the Platonic form. So I think that's a really important point to make with any new reactor design. The last piece, though, is it ties back to the Renaissance, is nuclear power is being championed as something that was going to save us from global warming. You're not going to see any of these designs hit pavement for another 10, 15, 20 years in sufficient quantities. And by then, we're going to be toast. Final piece, China, yes. They're probably, and publicly they backed off a little bit, but I think that's just for show. And they're still going to go ahead with the reactors they wanted to build as part of their 5-year plan. What you don't hear in the media is that 5-year plan contains twice as much capacity in wind as it does in nuclear. So they're definitely going to be the aggressive force in Asia on the renewable energy front if no one steps in and takes and fills that void.
Thank you. So
well, moving back to bombs, the first question I have is, with the nuclear bomb, there are both political and humanitarian sides to the issue. Although we can all agree on the risks and danger and ethics behind the use of the bomb, if other nations are willing to use it, then doesn't that give us a reason to pursue nuclear bombs as a means of self-defense? Dialogue should be pursued to remove nukes from existence, but it doesn't look like it can reasonably be implemented. A quite profound question and related to the next question. The NPT reminds me of the 553 agreement around 1900 setting ratios of battleships, England 5, UK 5, Germany 3. Isn't it axiomatic that when you articulate a policy of we get them, you don't, the other side won't rest until it gets weapons parity? So these are both questions about the uses of nuclear weapons as defensive or war-making instruments. Since the beginning of nuclear bombs, the idea of using bombs as self-defense has been less articulated than using bombs as a deterrent from others attacking you. I think there's a slight difference. It's nuance, but what you're doing is, with a nuclear bomb, you're saying, not so much that we can defend against your nuclear bomb, because we really can't. These are weapons of mass destruction, and we really can't defend against them. Our only defense is to ensure that you know that we will bomb you to smithereens first, if we can. So in terms of self-defense, it's, I think, probably a misnomer to think about nuclear weapons as defensive, although we talk about them that way. And it does sound, because we've had them around for so long and because they're so much a part of our national security policy and the national security policy of other countries, we do feel as though they're going to be here forever, and that it's impossible to implement any kind of abolition or prohibition against nuclear weapons. It does sometimes look hopeless. I work at the place that sets the doomsday clock, right? And so every day I wake up to think about what we're doing about nuclear weapons. The fact is, though, that we have gone from a total of 70,000 nuclear weapons possessed by the United States and the Soviet Union at the height of the Cold War in about 1987, down to about 22,000 between the two of us. There are other countries that have nuclear weapons, or maybe have them. North Korea may have 4. India and Pakistan are the most worrisome these days. Pakistan may have 100. India, perhaps 100. Israel, perhaps 200. France, 300. They're actually the one that's the closest in the race, although they've been dismantling their weapons. They're down to about 250 or so. And the UK, England, which has nuclear weapons on their Trident submarines, and we kind of jokingly say, well, they rent them from the United States, which is kind of true. So if you look at the number of nuclear weapons, obviously most of them are in Russia and the United States, and we're working to bring those down. We've just signed a New START treaty, which should help reduce them, and there will be future treaties, we're told, that will help bring them down. But I do think the other question does point to this very vicious cycle of arms races. And until we can figure out ways to reassure one another, build more transparency, and again, that's where the secrecy business comes in. The reason that a country will often attack another is because you think they may attack you first. And the big problem in international security and international relations is what do you do about surprise, as Joe talked about earlier. If we share our information, if we in fact have exchanges of information, which we do now with Russians, and they were our enemies, the worst enemy, then you begin to reassure one another that you're not about to attack, you're not about to mount a surprise attack, and you can begin to ratchet down the weapons that you have. The problem of the classes, those who have nuclear weapons and those who don't, I think is still a motivator for places like Iran, or, God forbid, we should talk about Japan. Japan could have nuclear weapons capability in about 6 months. They've got the technology. That's the dirty little secret in the nuclear world. They have enough of the material, and they certainly have the engineering capacity for that. So they're ahead of Iran, let's say, in that sense. So yes, having the National Academy of Sciences of the United States did a study, and they published in 1997. And actually, John Holdren, who's now our science advisor, was one of the co-authors of it. And they came to the conclusion that the only reason to have nuclear weapons is to deter other states that have nuclear weapons. So we have nuclear weapons to prevent others from attacking us with nuclear weapons. Well, by that logic, if none of us has nuclear weapons, then none of us will use nuclear weapons, have any reason to have nuclear weapons to deter someone else from attacking us. So I think there are many reasons, not the least of which these are the most dangerous technology on Earth. They are weapons of genocide. We would be perpetrating genocide if we use them. We will be the victims of genocide if they're used against us. And we say we've outlawed genocide. And we are horrified about Rwanda. We should be horrified about nuclear weapons as well. These are not weapons of war. Let me turn to 2 other questions which have to do with radiation effects, and then back to the nuclear power issue. One of the statistics in Atomic Mom stated that worldwide about 300,000 people have died as a result of nuclear testing. Is anyone keeping track of these cases and results? How many countries does this encompass? I don't know exactly where the figures came from for the movie and perhaps the film, and perhaps MT can enlighten us, but we are all downwind. I mean, all of us have been touched by the fallout from nuclear weapons. The atmosphere was really completely, well, there were many. The US did 1,000 nuclear tests, not all atmospheric, many of them underground, but we did a lot. We did more than any other country in the world. And of course, we're all here. And as you know, the weather pattern goes from west to east. And as I mentioned before, Kodak Film Company in Rochester, New York, complained about their film being somehow affected. So we're all carrying around a little bit of radiation from those tests. I can't say how many have died, and I don't know how many have been affected. But again, I think that is part of this security and secrecy culture that has been instituted, as Joe so eloquently describes, in which we really, there's an incredible lack of curiosity. And in the film, actually, Pauline Sylvia talks about the fact that she doesn't think anybody really measured the soldiers, never really followed them to find out what the radioactive effect would be on the humans. They were very interested in the animals, but didn't seem to do much about the humans. And I think that that is, again, indicative of the way that we have treated this very unusual and very powerful technology, and amazingly incurious about the effects of the weapons. So I don't believe that there has been any tracking. In fact, I'm pretty sure there hasn't. And when people have tried to suggest that their illnesses were a result of that fallout, they've found it very difficult to get information. I just have one more, set of questions, actually. Do we have a clear history of when nuclear power technology was transferred to civilian corporations? Did electrical energy corporations fund early research in nuclear power? Do government research facilities now work directly with nuclear energy electrical corporations now? And I will turn this back to Bob Rosner a little bit. My understanding is that the companies that worked on enrichment and some of the early technologies during the Manhattan Project, DuPont, Monsanto, and others, were private companies kind of commandeered for the war efforts, so that they were already involved in a lot of this. The nuclear technology, in fact, Leo Szilard tried to patent the nuclear bomb, as I recall. He was one of the people who suggested that we should use this against Germany, and he wasn't allowed to. So the patent office of the government prevented him from owning the patent himself. And you know, it sounds kind of funny, but he wanted to keep it away from the government, actually. He wanted to keep it away from the military. And that was kind of a tactic to do that. I don't know whether those corporations funded early research in nuclear power. I think, and Bob, you can answer, I mean, the naval nuclear reactors, I think, were developed by the Navy, probably with cooperation with private companies. And I think you can answer about government research facilities that now work directly with nuclear energy corporations.
Okay, so actually I have two comments. One is to your comment about the 300,000.
Yes,
okay. So I actually agree with you. I don't know what the number is. And I don't think anybody really knows what the number is. And one of the reasons is that one of the great mysteries about nuclear exposure, which is extremely frustrating, is that the amount of work, investment that's gone into understanding the effects of radiation dosages at very low levels. The amount of research that's gone in is pitiful. And we don't know, really. Is it linear or not? I mean, there's constant argument. So that's really too bad. And it's one of the reasons we really don't know for sure. There is an aspect, though, of the weapons program where we have extremely good statistics on deaths. And that has to do with an aspect of manufacture of weapons that has to do with a particular element that's used, at least in the generation of weapons that were developed in the 50s through the 60s, and that is beryllium. So beryllium is extremely poisonous. And it took a long time for the American government to accept the fact that a number of people, very large number of people, died because they were participants in the construction of weapons, and they got beryllium poisoning and died. So for that, there is abundant statistics, and one of the reasons is that unlike radiation damage, where there are lots of other ways of getting the same diseases, cancer, than just being exposed to the radiation, in that case, it's unavoidable that you can trace it back to having ingested beryllium. And that's why we have that number. In terms of the question that you asked, the second question that you asked is, private companies invested zero in the development of nuclear power. That money came from the Atomic Energy Commission, the AEC. Most of that work that was done in 2 laboratories, one Oak Ridge National Laboratory, the other one Argonne National Laboratory. In the case of Argonne, after the CP1, which was right here on, not far from here, on Ellis, the second was built out in Lamont. CP2, CP2 through 5 were all built in Lamont. And from then on, these test reactors were built in Idaho Falls, just outside of Idaho Falls. And that was all funded by the federal government. And the naval program, the Navy reactors, were actually, the development is actually carried out in Idaho, amazingly enough. There is this famous submarine reactor in the desert, which is, if you know anything about Idaho Falls, it's kind of desolate. And that was all done there as well.
I just wanted to, just as a, this is an advertisement. The Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists, which has been continuously published since 1945, does have a great deal of information about nuclear weapons, about nuclear power, about the Marshall Islands, about a whole range of things. It publishes articles by Joe MASCO and Bob ROSNER, and we will have in our July-August issue an issue devoted to nuclear energy, nuclear power. And our September-October issue is completely devoted to Fukushima, and we will have scientists, experts talking about what we then know by that time, and it looks worse just about every day, but we'll try and keep it going. And I did put out on the table reprints from our free online coverage of Fukushima during the days immediately after. You'll see that there were updates by Tatsuhiro Suzuki, who is identified as a member of Pugwash, but actually is the vice chair of the Japan Atomic Energy Commission, who's a colleague and friend. And he provided really daily updates during this whole period. It was extraordinary. And we heard from many that our coverage, his daily updates were much more accurate than the mainstream media, and actually were more timely than those. So I would encourage you to read the Bulletin. We are the authoritative source when things like this happen. Our phones are flooded with calls from the mainstream media, Reuters, ABC, CNN, asking, what the Bulletin can provide to them in way of information. So it is authoritative. It's written by people who are very knowledgeable, and we call it light peer review. But we do offer, I think, a wealth of information for you. Let me also just mention, in 1982, Frank von Hippel and a colleague wrote an article in the Bulletin, 1982, about the GE Mark I nuclear reactor and the problem of overpressurization and the release of radiation, in which they noted, as others had, that there was a problem when you had any kind of cooling problem where hydrogen would build up and there was the risk of explosion. And when that explosion happened, you'd have a radioactive release. In that article, and if you read it, it's like reading what happened at Fukushima. It was just extraordinary. And what they suggested was a filtering system for the radioactive material. It was suggested by the Nuclear Regulatory Commission that industry here in the United States take this up. It was thought to be too costly. On the other hand, I think the French and another country actually did install this filtering system for radioactive releases. It's just to say that the Bulletin is ahead of its time, unfortunately, on many of these issues. And so I just welcome you as readers. Thank you.
Just adding on to Kenneth's answer to the question, this is not about the test result, but there are 2 research facilities in Japan established after the atomic bombing of 1945, Atomic Bomb Casualty Commission, known for its acronym ABCC, built in 1946 in Hiroshima, 1947 in Nagasaki, which is still there, now funded by both governments, Japanese and the United States governments. So I just wanted
for long-range Data on human.
Human, yes, for the
Human effects.
human effects, exactly. Survivors. Sure. Okay, then the question which I received is a little different take. It's about religion, which might be appropriate since we are supposed to have a rapture today. But actually, the question is not about Christianity. I've seen a number of Buddhist memorial services taking place in the earthquake-affected areas of Japan. But how do practitioners of Shinto respond through ritual to the impurity of the nuclear accident? And my response would be, traditionally, Buddhism is the one who conduct the rituals. It was primarily Buddhism that conduct the funeral rituals, while death is considered as impure in Shinto. So Shinto rituals for funeral or Shinto rituals for death is not so much common, especially before 1868. But it does not mean that Shinto has nothing to do with this nuclear facilities. It has to do with its birth, which means Shinto has this ritual, jichinsai, which is perhaps like ritual for purifying or pacifying the spirits of the land. And since this was contested at the Supreme Court, but I think the decision was made, it was not violating the Constitution, the violation of religion and state. Because this ritual is rather cultural or traditional than religious. So I'm almost sure that when Fukushima or any other nuclear power plants was built, there was this ritual conducted. So again, I'm not quite sure if this was, okay, so that was, the last thing is that, and nuclear power plants was not considered as impure, and especially because of this ritual. Through this ritual, it has been pure, but also it has to do with this safety myth, because this was safe. There's no leakage of radiation. So I think that has also something to do with it. So Shinto people are probably now reinterpreting or redefining what they mean by what it means to have this ritual.
But additionally, I add something because nuclear industries in Japan named nuclear power plants name of Buddha.
Bodhisattva.
Yeah, like a Monju. Monju is one of Buddhism god. Bodhisattva. Yeah. And also, reclamation? 火葬ってなんて言うんですか?
Cremation.
Cremation. We do cremation according to the ritual of Buddhism, because almost of Japanese people need it. But this time, so many people died, and we couldn't do anything with this dead body with such a destroyed area. So government decided to bury them. And then hundreds of monks went to Fukushima to pray for burying body into the soil. This is really first time happening after World War II. Cremation? We didn't do. Didn't cremate for such many dead bodies. But I think monks, Buddhism monks, really participated, and they didn't care went such a destroyed area.
You mean they didn't worry about their own exposure?
Yeah, they are.
Just a quick additional thing to this Shinto question. The Association for Association of Shinto Shrines, which is like the biggest Shinto-based organization, has a huge connection to Liberal Democratic Party historically. They have been one of the biggest supporters, core supporters of that party, which means that, well, LDP has been promoting the nuclear energy for so many years. I could kind of see how they're trying to react this situation, especially many of the Shinto shrines in Japan, well, the Shinto-based organization. I'd like to ask Sid to respond.
So there's one question asking, Edward Teller in 1982 spoke on Midway on the topic of physics and common sense. I asked him why Germany never was able to develop the bomb. He responded, because Heisenberg didn't want them to. And the question is that credible? And I mean, I think that that's an imponderable question. I mean, I don't think we'll ever have any way of knowing one way or the other. Heisenberg was certainly a brilliant physicist, but he was not known for his great moral standing, as far as I know. And so I'm not sure what he felt about this in the end. It's also one thing that I think is certainly true is he may have been a brilliant physicist, but he was not infallible. I mean, and it took some very, I mean, the calculation that has been purported that was important for whether the bomb could be made was a delicate one. It had subtleties, and it was finally, as far as I recollect the history, was the calculation was done by Parles, and another excellent, great physicist, not as well known as Heisenberg, but and it's a subtlety, and you know it's easy to miss subtleties, and somehow maybe scientists seem to, you might think that scientists should know everything and just be able to do every calculation exactly, but that's why it's a creative subject, is to really try and figure out what the subtleties are important. And I think it's perfectly likely that Heisenberg missed it, and if he had not missed it and gotten it, I never heard any reason to suspect that he would have tried to hide it, and he would have gone for it. That's my opinion, but as I said, you know, we'll never be able to know the answer to that. I mean, and there were, I mean, he was, after Germany surrendered the war, he and a bunch of other German scientists were sequestered, and actually they were spied on. They were taped in their conversations, and you know, again, you never know exactly, but the information was that he seemed very surprised that the bomb could be built and was made. So I don't think there's particularly good evidence to say that he didn't want Germany to have the bomb. I mean, I don't think that that's, I don't know, other people I'm sure have other ideas about it, but that's kind of my take on the situation.
Thank you. And Dave?
You wanted the waste questions? There were questions that were turned in prior to this, I guess, online, and I've been asked to handle one of the waste questions here. First one is in an April update covering the ongoing monitoring of radiation exposures in the U.S., EPA explains that based on the trace amounts of iodine-131 found in drinking water samples from the northwest of Japan, an infant would have to drink almost 7,000 liters of this water to receive a radiation dose equivalent to a day's worth of natural background radiation exposure we experience continuously from natural sources of radioactivity in our environment. Is it reasonable to use general background radiation levels as a gauge for assessing the risks associated with a highly selective radioactive isotope like iodine-131, which concentrates in the thyroid? Or does this underestimate the true risk to human health? Wow. Okay, I'm not a health physicist, but a layer I would add on to this conundrum is it's not, well, let's see how to attack it. Another factor involved here is the iodine is an internal dose. as would be the cesium, the strontium, the other elements that they're detecting, both in the food and in the water. And that's a factor that has to be looked at as well. One of the problems with exposures of populations in the past, and even using the Hiroshima data, is that it's largely an external dose calculation, meaning outside of your body. But many of these isotopes, when they do get incorporated, stay put, they don't move, and that's where you end up with problems that if the body cannot flush out particles from the lungs or from the digestive tract, and they're allowed to stay there, it's a different kind of animal than the external dose would be. So I can't attest to the numbers that are used here about the 7,000 liters or anything like that, but the selectivity of the isotope is an important consideration. And so you can't just go to background in all cases and make that comparison, because there are going to be other factors. The other thing involved is the effects of radiation are different between men and women, for children, and that's even isotope dependent. And they're also different for people who have immune deficiency problems and senior citizens as well. So these are all complicating factors where you can't just go back and look at and compare it to what are statistically background numbers, which are set using what's called a reference man. The reference man using these doses is I believe it's 160-pound European extraction, white male, 30 years old, and that's the way the calculations get made based on various isotopes. That doesn't really reflect very well an exposure to a child, to a fetus, and et cetera. So the radiation issue gets very complicated. And as Bob pointed out earlier, the controversy about chronic low dose exposure has really been a nagging one for many, many years. The last official pronouncement in this country is that there's a method called the no threshold linear dose model is what has been upheld by the National Academy of Sciences in 2005. What it says is that the effect is proportional to the dose over time. The higher the dose, the longer the effect, and this is important, that the effects are cumulative over lifetime. So that really makes things difficult to interpret as well. There's one other piece. Oh, there are other controversies on the low dose end of radiation which have not been fully examined, and the National Academy recommended they be looked at. There are some paradoxic effects at low doses which seem to indicate that at the cellular level there's more harm being done than these gross dose calculations would give you. One of the effects is called the bystander effect, whereby one cell gets hit, let's say, by a dose of radiation, but other cells around it experience or exhibit the effect. This is an example of the kinds of unusual effects that are observed, but we don't have a clue of a model as to why it's happening or what the effects will be over time. Another one at the other end of the spectrum is called hormesis, which is the idea that a little bit of radiation will do you some good because it kind of tunes up your cells in your body to resist. That also has not been validated by the NAS, and they say more study needs to be done. I guess the final piece on this, in terms of the radiation issue, is that the Nuclear Regulatory Commission has commissioned the National Academy to undertake studies around nuclear power plants in the United States. And they just had a meeting here in Bolingbrook a few weeks back. They're going to have one in Atlanta, Georgia next week. So this is an ongoing study group that is trying to go back and address some of these exposure issues, low-dose exposure issues around nuclear facilities. So that was a long answer to a question. And in Japan, as I say, it's a very complicated issue. The real important thing, though, is watch the food and the water. And I think that's not getting enough attention. There's some recent reports in the last few days showing that the contamination in the water is farther afield than originally expected and of higher amounts than were originally expected as well. And in the oceans, as we saw in the movie today, you will have bioconcentration of some of these nuclides through the seaweeds, through the fish. Second question has to deal with something that wasn't in either of the films. It's depleted uranium. I'm interested in the problem of depleted uranium and the difficulty that the general public has in comprehending the science and math probability involved in radiation effects. I recently learned about the concept of the precautionary principle. It seems to me this is a very important idea, but it's hard for our society to accept that we have become injured to the idea that we can have power to know everything and conquer everything. Can we possibly implement the precautionary principle without some kind of radical rethinking of social ideology? Can we compartmentalize problems and effectively solve them? Or is what's really needed some kind of a total change of behavior? Well, actually, this is more of a sociology question, I guess, even though they started out on the depleted uranium. Depleted uranium, though, is a good example of what I was mentioning a moment ago. The isotope used is actually a very slow emitting isotope. It's the leftover uranium that is not used in the reactors. And we have many hundreds, thousands of tons of this sitting around in the country. It's remanufactured into weaponry because it's extremely good at destroying things. The problem that occurs with the depleted uranium, though, is normal uranium particles will only penetrate so far into the lung tissue and are usually flushed out pretty effectively in the digestive tract, so they don't always stick around. The unfortunate factor in the depleted uranium issue, though, is that this weaponry is also pyrophoric, which means it burns at a very, very hot temperature, and when it does that, it breaks these uranium particles down to much smaller diameters than they would be if it were a natural uranium source. So it's not the same as the uranium ore, or even just the depleted uranium sitting around at the facilities. The 6,000 or 7,000 degree temperature actually ceramicizes the uranium particles and reduces them in size by at least a factor of 10. And what happens is that these particles go much deeper into lung tissue, for example, and stay there, because the body has a real difficult time expelling the ceramics. So this is the controversy on depleted uranium, which was used in the Gulf Wars, as was mentioned earlier, possibly in Libya, and possibly Yugoslavia as well.
No evidence?
I'm only saying I'm reporting what I've heard. I don't know about Libya for sure. But the fact there is that the nations that have depleted uranium weaponry, France, United States, England, and Russia, resist all efforts to have this stuff examined, regulated, or gotten rid of as a weapon. Yet many activist groups are looking at this as a very subtle weapon of mass destruction because it meets many of the criteria on the international codes of law for being indiscriminate, over time, and directed at populations that were not combatants. So it's a very complicated issue, both scientifically and legally, internationally.
Yeah, so I measured the radiation spectrum directly, depleted uranium bullet, 30 millimeters round, in Basra, Iraq. And it was 3.75 microsievert per hour. And I measured also in Fukushima prefecture, some cities. And sometimes some ground is much higher than depleted uranium itself. We have high dose. And if I tell this, if I talked about this, and the people who are living in Fukushima is really shocked. What should we do?
I know that we are already past the time, but I'd like to extend this. I'm targeting the end time at 5:30, hopefully. So that. Okay. Quick question. But you have to come here for the microphone.
I would just like a simple explanation for why this weapon is better than weapons that aren't treated in this fashion. Why is it a superior weapon?
The depleted uranium and another non-radioactive metal, tungsten, have very good penetrating capabilities because they're so dense. Uranium is a very dense metal. The other aspect, though, of the uranium is, as I mentioned earlier, is that it burns so hot it doesn't really explode. It actually burns its way through the thing you're shooting at. Well, sometimes tanks, but it can be other things too. And other uraniums have that same kind of penetrating capability without the fire. There are uranium bombs and weapons that are used against hardened underground bunkers, for example, because they're dense and they will penetrate farther. But in the case of the depleted uranium specifically, the shells that HITOMI mentioned a moment ago, they actually cut through armor at 7,000 degrees, and then when they burst through the other side is when the shock wave just explodes everything. So there is not a kind of armor out there that can withstand this. And if you've seen the old photographs of the 2003 Gulf invasion, the Iraq invasion, they were just popping these Soviet tanks off like nothing. They were just, there's no way to resist it. The flip side of that, though, is that modern battle tanks have a layer of depleted uranium worked into their armor to resist regular weaponry. So our tanks, our M1 Abrams, have layers of depleted uranium in parts of their armoring surfaces. They're sandwiched between other metals, so you're not getting the direct contact there unless those plates somehow get dislodged or broken or whatever. And the final piece is that the military personnel have to handle the shells when they're loading into their guns. And there's a lot of sloppy procedure going on in the military of handling depleted uranium rounds. So this is another questionable pathway of exposure for the military personnel who use the depleted uranium weapons.
So, Bob?
Yeah. Okay.
The microphone.
Sorry. Yeah, there was a question about thorium. Would thorium be safe to use for energy? Does it also cause cancer? So just a little bit of background. So there have been for quite some time 2 routes to nuclear energy. One uses uranium, the one that we use, the other one based on thorium. Thorium is an element in many ways similar to uranium, that is, there's a fissile form of it, and in some places on this earth, especially in India, it's incredibly abundant. There are enormous quantities of it. From the point of view, excuse me, of health and so on, and the way it's used, thorium and uranium reactors are essentially the same. There is fundamentally no difference. The difference, it has to do with a topic that KENNETTE touched on, which is to what extent are nuclear power plants also part of a fuel cycle that touches on weapons. So the problem, of course, with uranium-based plants is that all nuclear plants that use uranium are basically plutonium factories. So what comes out at the tail end is actually more fissile material, that is stuff that can be used in a bomb, than you put in as U-235 in the front end. And that's, of course, a problem. And much of what you've heard about in the newspapers or you've read about non-proliferation issues is always focused on that back end of what to do with the material, the fissile material that's in the waste stream for these nuclear reactors. And thorium cycle plants, in fact, from this point of view, are really much better. And the reason is that while it is not true that you cannot build weapons based on thorium material, it's much more difficult than even plutonium weapons. So, so that's the principal reason for doing it. For the Indians, I think a more important reason why they are the principal funders of this currently is because they have a lot of it and they worry about, what we call here energy security, that is assured supply. My personal feeling is that it's a dead issue, and that has to do with the fact that the infrastructure for nuclear anything is extremely expensive. We would not have nuclear power plants. We wouldn't have a nuclear industry if it hadn't been for the bomb program to begin with, because the bomb program basically built the infrastructure to allow nuclear power plants to exist. The enrichment, which is the front end, was all about gaseous diffusion plants, enormously expensive, and they simply would not have been built if it hadn't been for the weapons program. So to now do this all over again for thorium cycle, I think that is totally implausible.
Thank you. So if you have questions, please come to the front because we need microphones.
I just wonder if there's one possible way to mitigate the global climate crisis without further reliance on nuclear fission power plants is to perhaps engage globally on a Manhattan-level project to put online renewables that are carbon neutral, like wind, solar, geothermal, and hydrogen, have also distribution and delivery systems, but also to make controlled nuclear fusion a viable component of that, so we can keep the nuclear technology in civilian hands, but also phase out further global use of the nuclear fission.
I think the two of us maybe have something to say about this. So I think the issue is that it's not like the Manhattan Project. And it has very much to do with what Dave and I talked about earlier, which is anything in the energy field has a huge time constant associated with it. You can't just, dump a lot of money and expect that in a year you'll be better off, and then go build things and expect that within, let's say, 10, 20 years you're going to solve the CO2 problem. That's just not going to happen. So I think for the long term, now we're talking about on the century time scale, then things like, for example, fusion might be something. Whether or not we'll get there is an open question. I mean, I'm not all that optimistic, quite frankly. I think the green technologies that we've heard about, I think, can absolutely provide a very large fraction of our energy demand together with conservation. But ultimately, I think we do have to face the fact that for a number of industries, there is no other option. Take, for example, the airplane industry. How to fly airplanes without fossil fuels or something that's like that, renewables. It's a bit of a question. I don't know how you're going to do that.
As I said earlier, if you look back in the, let's say, last 5 years in Scientific American, there are quite a number of pretty decent articles, pretty well researched, give you some numbers to chew on that you can, argue about, which go in the direction that we can deal with the climate problem certainly better by going to efficiency and renewables than embracing any of the existing production technologies, which would be nuclear, fossil, essentially. One that I'm particularly fond of is by a colleague of mine in Washington. His name is Dr. Arjun Makhijani, and he will be in the September issue of the Bulletin. And he has put together a program called Carbon-Free, Nuclear-Free. The book is online in PDF format for free if you want to actually go and slog through the numbers. He mapped this out about 4 years ago, and it's a work in progress, because that's the other critical thing I really dislike about the solar utopians and all this is it's a static thing for many people, and the world changes constantly. This program, on the other hand, it moves with the technologies that are appropriate and the ones that are most likely to be developed, as opposed to the ones that are showing signs of failure. So it's a constantly evolving concept, but it starts out with the principle of an energy future without fossil fuels and without nuclear. Originally, he said by 2050. He's revised his numbers to 2040 at this point. So the kicker is, there are lots of ideas, and the question is not just which of these concepts works, but then you have to integrate those concepts into the already existing world of an infrastructure and understand that what we have now may not be suitable. And the grid is the perfect place to talk about this first. You could do a whole conference on the grid, and you should probably do one on the grid, because depending on what kind of grid you pick, you are going to be giving selective advantage either to renewables or to the existing infrastructure of centralized power. So it's a complicated thing, and we're going to have to spend the money anyway. The point is, you decide your future, and then you start mapping out the pieces that get you there the best. So,
thank you. So, please.
So I just thought it would be interesting to think about what else we're downwind of, because we've talked a lot about ratios and being downwind and what things are harmful to us. And I might join you in being another sacrificial lamb, but I don't think that if you really look at the ratios that, and I mean, don't get me wrong, like everything that's happened in Japan is horrific and terrible, but if you're looking at what else we're downwind of, I'd like to hear some numbers about that, because I know it's not as nice as we think it is.
Yeah, I've seen the number that in the United States, 10,000 people die every year from diseases associated with particulate coal from particulate matter. So, and not, I guess, we don't know how many have died. Let's put it this way, from radiation exposure. But it is clear that yes, other technologies also kill people. There are mine accidents. There are oil spills. So all technologies have benefits and risks, and we need to be more knowledgeable, I think, about what those are, and also what they are in light of the benefits that we receive. And I think those are very tough questions that we can come to grips with, but I think we need to pay more attention to those issues than we do to Lindsay Lohan, probably.
I agree completely with what Kennette just said, but because I run into this kind of question quite often, I'm wondering if it doesn't stop our energetic and creative thinking that, well, coal does this much harm and nuclear does this much harm. Whenever I'm presented with an either-or question, I feel like backing off and saying sometimes neither nor. I don't want either of those things. I don't want people being killed because of the processes associated with coal or with radiation. So just as a form of question, I'm thinking that we need to be cautious about getting stopped at that form of questioning.
Maybe you better talk about the radiation that coal emits.
I'll put a little comment in on this, because last year the EPA had a meeting in Chicago where they were taking comments on what to do about the coal ash from plants. And our organization submitted comments saying you should probably regulate coal ash the way you would nuclear waste. Now, of course, the EPA is not going to listen to that, but there's definitely radioactive content in the ash, and depending on how good the capture technology is up the stack, it is going to get, some of it is spewed out into the surrounding area. So we're not saying we're in favor of either coal or nuclear. It's saying equal unfairness to all. That's our motto. You regulate them both. If they're killers, they're killers. That's the way it is. So. Yeah, so there is definitely radiation, and also in the mining process, both mining processes. You go down in the mines. You're going to be subjected to the radon gas down there, and the uranium tailings out in the southwest are open air sewers in a sense, just dumping radioactive gases onto Navajo reservations. So both processes, extractive processes dealing with mining, have a radiation risk. Absolutely.
I'm just wondering if I can put this in the form of questions. One of them has to do with our energy priorities. I mean, for instance, agriculture, big agriculture, which a lot of which goes to raising cattle, energy for which goes to raising cattle, and corn and so on for fuel. Could our energy priorities change? That's one question I have. The other is, aren't we really getting pretty far behind in creating alternative technologies compared to Europe? And that's, I think, really another issue that we should.
And Kamanaka-san maybe later.
Yeah. Let me start with the latter part. Okay. I don't think the U.S. is particularly behind on the technology front. Maybe on the deployment of technology, that's a different story. But on the development of technology, I think we are actually in pretty good shape. In fact, many of the technologies that are out there actually came from U.S. national labs, quite frankly. So it's the deployment that where we're lacking. In terms of the other question that you asked, and that's a different story. That is in science. That is, in fact, one interesting thing that we heard. We had invited the Undersecretary for Science, Steve Koonin, here a few weeks ago, and one of the questions asked him, so in your opinion, so what is the issue? And he said policy. He didn't say science. And that resonates with what David said, I think. It's, we have deficits on the policy end, the deployment of things. In terms of changing the way we use power, I think that's a very complicated story. My own feeling is that much of it does relate to things that I'm absolutely not expert in, such as, for example, sociological and psychological issues. Why is it that CFL bulbs are not as popular as they should be? Why is it that we're now getting pushback from some parts of the Republican Party and that we should be continuing, you know, they feel attacked personally because we're suggesting that incandescent bulbs are a bad idea. So, you know, this is a very weird country, quite frankly. and there are people interested at, for example, the University of Chicago in the field of behavioral economics. It's a very interesting question of how you guide behavior of people in a way that, from the point of view of social good, that people do good things. And I'm not an expert on that, and maybe there's some people here that can say some things about that.
Can I say something? So, 2010, in Sweden, #1 energy became energy from cattle waste matter. Biomass. Yeah, biomass gas. And if you take out biomass gas from cattle waste matter, and then, so this liquid can use like a fertilizer. And in agricultural field, it circulates energy and fertilizer, and but I think in the United States, you're depending on chemicals and also oil. But you know, if you use like this, and then now #1 energy is now biogas from cattle waste matter, and then #2 is oil in Sweden from 2010. I think it's a really, really big change. So they are progressing like this. You don't need to do in United States, you mean? Yeah, so it's your choice. Yeah. But so because you have oil, that's why.
I think the difference is between energy efficient agriculture and labor intensive agriculture. That's part of, I think that's maybe what she's getting.
Really? So is he correct? Is that what you wanted to say?
You're right. You may be getting at the issue that that raising cattle for meat for consumption is extremely energy intensive. That maybe that we should all become vegetarians.
What's the question?
If we don't have any more, do you have a question?
Yes.
Yeah.
I agree. I don't eat meat. Personally.
Well, first of all, I'd like to thank very much all the panelists. This has been an amazing day. And as my own question, my question is about owning your experience. I think touches on Atomic Mom and questions of particularly related with the culture of secrecy that Professor MASCO is talking about, the kind of research that goes on at these kind of facilities, and the kind of control that's put in place, for example, around Chernobyl, around Fukushima, the exclusion zones. Who owns the experience of those people who are researchers, who are part of that culture of secrecy, or who lived in those exclusion zones? Because I would say it's not necessarily them anymore. Or how would you respond to that?
Well, that's a great question. And of course, we have a whole variety of ways of talking about it. One might be, looking from the US perspective, this effort coming out of the 90s to do calculations for how long certain areas of land that have been contaminated in various ways need to be monitored. And so it's a very formal kind of bureaucratic procedure, actually, to choose a few hundred pieces of land that needed to be monitored for some hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands of years, right? And what those reports do is really push past the boundaries of thinking of any nation state. And so it really puts on the table the very fundamental question about if in fact we're dealing with national security and nuclear technologies, if those are somehow fundamentally linked, but there are kinds of effects, kinds of damages that exceed the reasonable longevity of any kind of political group, then that's a new kind of politics. And you know, we have some films that are out now that are thinking about it. We have lots of reports of, you know, efforts to communicate to a distant future generation the safety risk around a certain site. And what's interesting about these reports is language breaks down, culture breaks down. It turns out it's really hard to communicate, you know, a few hundred years in the future, let alone 10,000 years or 1,000,000 years or however long you imagine the risk to be. So it is one of those places where culture and language breaks down.
I'd like to ask the question. Around the nuclear industry and radiation, there's a lot of fear surrounding the effects of it. I'd like to ask, first of all, sorry? No. What regulations, what safeguards would have to be in place to, or what's the best practice for that to make nuclear technology safe? And secondly, how to assuage the fears of the public and to let the public know that that their fears are being considered.
Well, let me take your last question, and maybe some can take the other questions. Yeah, radiation is a very difficult issue because it is, the low-dose radiation is hard to measure. It's, you know, all the problems with it. And I think the real issue for us is how much information we think the public can stand. And how do we process that information? What do we do with it? Many times, I think government officials, well, almost always, government officials underestimate the capacity of citizens to understand situations and to actually be helpful. And my experience with some government people about the terrorist issue, for instance, is really appalling. I mean, they think everyone's going to panic. They don't even know what panic is, and fail to even understand that after 9/11, the problem was not people panicking and running away. It was there were so many people coming to the site to help. So I think what we need to ask for is more information. We can deal with it. We can handle it. Everyone says, oh, the public doesn't understand about risk. Well, they may not understand about radiation, but then not many scientists do either. So the question really is how much information we are interested in having, what we want to do with it, and I think demanding that we get as much as we can, knowing that there are going to be ambiguities, there will be inconsistencies, there will be incomplete information. But we're getting pretty used to dealing with different kinds of information now, and I think it's up to us to continue to demand that we get even incomplete information and that we will help make the decisions as well.
I just had something quickly. Yeah, sure. Oh, do you want to go?
Yeah, maybe just to follow up to what Kenneth said. So I'm a deep believer in being completely open, as you might have guessed. And let me give you an example of something that affects everybody in this room, of information that you may not know about. So when the Cold War ended, one of the consequences was that all of a sudden for all American Western European airlines, it became possible to have much shorter routes across the North Pole. So there are many routes now that when you fly from Chicago, for example, actually directly north. Okay. Now, from the point of view of radiation exposure, that's really bad news. In fact, it's bad news enough that, for example, most airlines that fly those routes have now limits for their pilots on how many and their flight crews, basically, how often they can fly those routes. Now, you might think that this is publicized because, some of us fly to Europe all the time. Try to find it on the web. It's not that easy. Okay. So now, the other side of the coin is that it's so interesting to note that the public is amazingly fearless about things that are very dangerous. For example, just think about the fact that how many people die driving a year. I mean, it's tens of thousands of people. It completely makes the other things that we were just talking about negligible. Yet, when is the last time you worried about getting in a car? Okay. Right? Most of us don't think about that. So I think there's a lot to be said for just being clear about what the facts are. I'm a deep believer in just letting it all hang out, and people then will make their decisions.
I would just second those the last two statements, which were really elegantly rendered. And the one thing I would add to it is that nuclear fear is also a political tool. It has been right from the beginning. It's used for all sorts of things. In the United States, we've had a very clear demonstration of it over the last decade in the whole concept of the war on terror, but we can find the political uses of nuclear fear in every decade. And so that's the other side of this that we would have to address. Openness would be a good start, but the politics of fear are also really loud.
I can't profess to speak for the public because there's an awful lot of them, and I don't know half of them. So I don't know what they would accept. And how would you even determine that? By what mechanism would we choose? It sounds absurd, but you get my point, I think, is the public needs at least to be consulted, and however you define them, and then by what means you get the information. But one thing I did want to add to the discussion here is how standards are set currently. And, as brackets, as boundaries, you might look at zero release would be something that you might want, the public might want, let's say. The standard that's used by regulators today is called ALARA, as low as reasonably achievable. Well, that begs all kinds of, messy questions like reasonable to whom, who gets to decide, et cetera, et cetera. So, but it's what we've got now, and the best we can do is weigh in on some of these processes and procedures and really go after the radiation study stuff, because that will be immensely helpful to help make it more accurate. Now, I would also want to point out the distinction between standards that are legally enforceable, the regulations that have to be complied with, and performance goals. And performance goals are not such a bad thing, and if an industry is strongly urged by whatever means the powers that be urge them to go after a zero release, it may not be such a bad thing unless it bankrupts them, of course. And that's where you start juggling the balls, because the simplest equation for what the public would use as a yardstick is safety equals money. And that's really what it comes down to. That's why these tea kettles cost $8 billion now. So.
Thank you. So I'd like to end this by asking filmmakers to say really quickly on their thoughts, final thoughts of this day.
Well, I feel really honored to share this stage with these amazing folks, and I learned so much today that I didn't know, and I'm really grateful for your expertise and for your mentorship. Thank you.
So, yeah, of course, me too. I learned a lot. And I started thinking about to go back. And then, how to say? It's very difficult because when I went to Iraq, I met so many children and also babies getting diseases, not only cancers, and various kinds of, and nobody could really explain why. And also you can't prove because of depleted uranium use. So in between, I think weakest people babies and children. So, it's difficult to accept the victims that because of radiation. That's I just like to confess it is difficult. Sorry. Thank you.